I'm trying to share it to you. There it is. It's working. All right, folks. Welcome back. We're doing some land news today, and I think my audio is working this time. Um, we are going to go ahead and get started here. I have probably too many news articles, so I'm going to try to breeze through them. Today it is the last day of January in 20 of 25. So we're going to get started with this article here from the New York Post. Why boomers are refusing to give their $84 trillion in real estate wealth to their children. Um, I really like to start with some of these more broad articles that aren't necessarily land focused, but maybe have a little bit to do about what's going on in the general real estate economy. All right, if you're this is from Dina Sartori Bodo. If you're a millennial or Gen Xer, you've likely heard a lot about the looming great wealth transfer. Baby boomers have reached the age where conversations of retiring and downsizing are finally coming to the fore. Typically, it's also the time parents begin to see how much of real estate they're willing to share with their children while everyone else is still together. The assumption has been that the children of baby boomers would soon be on the receiving end of one of the largest generational wealth transfers in history. However, according to a new survey, folks over 60 are holding on to their assets. Let's figure out why. According to a new report from Charles Schwab, almost half of boomers surveyed confessed they wanted to enjoy my money for myself while I'm still alive. So if you were holding out and waiting for this will to pay out, it doesn't look like it's going to happen for a lot of folks. Um, Schwab's team surveyed 1,000 high net worth Americans who are defined as people with more than 1 million in investable assets. The demo skews heavily toward the baby boomer generation as they possess 83.5 trillion in wealth. DBS forecasted that boomer assets, which included real estate as well as cash, would transfer to the younger generations within the next 20 to 25 years. While there's data that suggests children of boomers will still inherit real estate from their folks, the timeline is stretching. Um, do. Yeah, the rest of the article is just kind of nonsense drivel. But yeah, it's interesting here because I think what a lot of people are always curious to know is who, if we're trying to study and learn from the major trends, one thing I think we want to pay attention to is um, how these properties are going to change hands and in what time frame. So if boomers are looking to cash out on their real estate as opposed to holding on to it and willing it to their family members, then if you are the sort of person that has cash and wants to buy real estate, maybe that's not a bad market to pursue. Especially if in my industry, if I can find maybe a boomer holding on to some land, that might inform the conversations I'm having. Be like, hey, aren't you nearing retirement? Maybe you should be considering how you're going to enjoy your remaining years instead of just holding on to this so boring old piece of dirt. Um, so yeah, I thought that article was interesting. It's also not a bad idea to, be in pursuit of some of their funds for investment. All right, and then this next article, again, we're kind of starting broad here. I've been following this trend here a little bit that's discussing um, out of country real estate purchases. It's kind of a big deal, the idea that foreign entities can come into the United States and buy land. A lot of countries don't allow that at all. Um, and so this article here coming out of the Federalist Society, thefedsoc.org, this is written by Michael D. Berry. This land is not your land, the effort to divest foreign state ownership of American land. In February 2023, the U.S. Air Force shot down that high altitude balloon. Da, 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 da. The balloon was being used by China in an attempt to surveil strategic sites in the United States. The Chinese spy balloon incident sparked increased national security fears, leading federal and state officials to take action. That year alone, legislators in 33 states introduced more than 80 new bills that would prohibit the Chinese government, some of its business holdings, and some Chinese nationals from purchasing agricultural land or property rights near American military installations. Many of these bills have now become state laws. And those state-led efforts have inspired similar efforts at the federal level. So what we're seeing here is this trend to maybe make it illegal for these out-of-state actors to own land or real estate in the United States. They cite threats to national security, critical infrastructure, and food supply chain. Lawmakers generally enjoy the support of conservative policy experts who warn of significant threats posed by foreign ownership of American ag land. There are nevertheless some foreseeable legal challenges to those legislative efforts. Prospective prohibitions, that is, preventing future purchases, might be easier to accomplish, but it could be much more difficult to divest those who already own significant swaths of land in the United States. So how are they going to rip the land away from, whatever these Chinese actors, I guess? Thus far, federal lawmakers' efforts to ban or divest foreign land ownership have fallen short, but bolstered by President Donald Trump's reelection and his agenda, there are now renewed efforts to pass legislation that block China and other designated adversaries from purchasing American land. Shortly after President Trump's second inauguration, Ted Cruz reintroduced the Protecting Military Installations and Ranges Act, which requires a review by federal authorities before entities linked to China, Russia, Iran, or North Korea can purchase land within 100 miles of any American military installation. And I guess that has to do with the fact that Chinese actors were buying land next to military bases, like right next door, I guess. That's not very good. Should the bill make its way to President Trump's desk, there's little doubt that he would sign it into law, but the question remains whether such a law would survive legal challenges. Lawmakers are sure to be buoyed by the Supreme Court's recent decision to uphold a law that bans the social media application TikTok, yada yada yada. Foreign ownership of American land is a subject fraught with many overlapping interests: constitutional law, national security, property rights, the food supply chain, and critical infrastructure are but a few of the many legal and policy issues at stake. Um, so yeah, this is just something that's kind of always fascinated me. How our government's going to treat these situations, and it looks like maybe there's a little bit of a renewed effort. I guess this administration is kind of considered to be more focused on, I guess, like what's going on within its borders, isolationist, some might call. All right, and then I have a few articles I'll try to gloss through here. This one's interesting, out of California. This is coming from Lexology.com, crafting a winning bid under California's Surplus Land Act. This is published today by Frost Brown Todd LLP. It's no secret that there's a shortage of affordable housing in California. One of the many ways the state is seeking to address the shortage is through the Surplus Land Act, or SLA, codified by government code. Da da da. The legislature reaffirms its declaration that housing is of vital statewide importance to health, safety, and welfare of the residents of the state, and that provision of a decent home and a suitable living environment for every Californian is a priority of the highest order. The legislature further declares that a shortage of sites available for housing for persons and families of low, moderate income is a barrier to addressing urgent statewide housing needs, and that surplus government land prior to disposition should be made available for that purpose. So here we're talking about getting government land, so I guess state-owned land, I would assume, and trying to repurpose that or give it to developers. Let's see what maybe they go into more detail here. Qualifying a private developer to buy surplus land. How is it that surplus land made available to a private housing developer? It's a fairly simple process, but it requires the developer to take the proactive step of notifying the California Department of Housing and Community Development of the developer's interest in surplus land, while also submitting a self-certification as a housing sponsor. Any individual, corporation general, or limited partnership or other legal entity, both for-profit and nonprofit, can do this per Health and Safety Code. The simple three-page self-certification form is available on the department's website. So I guess they just fill out a little document and they can go buy this land. The SLA applies to all local agencies in California. Every city and county district, including school, sewer, water utility, and local and regional parks districts of any kind or class, joint powers, authority, successor agency to a former development agency, housing authority, or other political subdivision of the state thereof is empowered to acquire and hold real estate. Before a local agency can sell its real property or lease it for a term in excess of 15 years, The local agency must declare the property to be surplus land, which is a legal definition, meaning land owned in fee simple by any local agency for which the local agency's governing body takes formal action in a regular public meeting declaring that the land is surplus and is not necessary for the agency's use. While most surplus land is subject to the SLA, there are plenty of exceptions discussed at the end of this article. Um, this is actually a really interesting article. I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste this one into the notes here or into the comment section. I should probably start doing that with all the articles now that I think about it. But this one talks about exactly how to go about doing this. It tells you how to create, generate the proposal, how the negotiation phase works, time available to respond. What if negotiations fail? I mean, it really goes in depth here on how to do this. And this might be an opportunity, kind of an undervalued opportunity for anyone that's interested in maybe getting into something with a little less competition. Um, some of these entities probably owned land that is ripe for development, but others might have land that maybe is possible to purchase and resell to a separate developer, something along those lines. But I don't work in this state for the most part, anyways. But I thought it was really fascinating and really well detailed, so I thought I'd bring this to everybody's attention. Okay, next we have the Virginia debate over solar development goals and land use has rural lawmakers on edge. Boom. Okay. This is from InsideClimateNews.org by Charles Paulin. Virginia debate over solar development goals and land use has rural lawmakers on edge. All right. The debate simmering for years about the construction of utility scale solar facilities on farms and forest land in Virginia has reached a boil in the new legislative session, with decarbonization targets looming over the state and a proposed new facility review board threatening to infringe upon local decision making. The state's Commission on Electric Utility Regulation recently reinvigorated the to consider bills outside of Virginia's 45 or 60-day legislative session, voted earlier this month to endorse proposed legislation to create the Virginia Energy Facility Review Board that would weigh in on proposed solar projects. A new version of the bill, crafted in recent weeks, is in response to local opposition, would leave final decisions on solar and battery storage facilities in the hands of uh, localities, but require them to include targets for achieving statewide clean energy goals. The revised bill drops a model ordinance to review board would have drawn up for all new projects, as well as review board authority to issue opinions on the advisability of new projects unless the developer asks for one. The CEUR endorsed policy seeks to balance the needs of many competing interests from the state and localities, developers, and conservation groups, said Carrie Heron, executive director of CEUR, in an email to Inside Climate News. It would bring more information into the record for localities to consider during initial permit reviews and create a framework around local planning and policies. So this bill continues that mission. The siting legislation comes as the state labors to comply with the Virginia Clean Economy Act, or VCEA, a 2020 law seeking to decarbonize the grid by mid-century. Given a recent uptick in local government denials of solar project proposals, developers and environmental groups say they are concerned with these targets will be missed. This is kind of an interesting phenomenon. So many people are wanting to have solar farms in their state, but it's NIMBY. What do they call it? NIMBYism, not in my backyard. They just don't want it. They don't want it in their area. So all these different officials are kind of pushing back and saying they're not interested, um, which is kind of worth considering if you're looking to invest in large acreage for this purpose. Because it is very attractive, I think, in a lot of these areas to establish some sort of lease on solar energy or solar farms. They tend to be very, very long and very lucrative. So just because they make an offer and maybe even you sign a lease doesn't mean that would get approved in certain areas, because it has to go to the local government, as most of us know, and they could say no, thank you. Joe Lurch, director of local government policy with the Virginia Association of Counties, said the initial proposal was starting down the path of preempting local decision-making authority. So this is where it kind of gets scary. So the state has this law in place saying, hey, we really need to have, um, we need to get some green energy going in here. We need more solar farms and things of that nature. And then all of a sudden, you find out that these local governments don't want to participate. They're getting very NIMBYistic on you, and they say, we will just overpower you. And Virginia, I think, falls into the Freedom Belt, so there's going to be a lot of pushback. We're supportive of all non-greenhouse gas emission sources of meeting that electricity demand, whether it's solar, small modular reactors. It can also be geothermal, Lurch said in an interview. But we think it needs to be more of a comprehensive look at the whole energy picture, not just favoring one industry over others when it comes to the local decision-making process. And here's another thing: people push back on these solar farms because a lot of this stuff is foreign owned. The solar panels are all being purchased out of country. It's all being sponsored by um, federal or state funds. So, yeah, I think that's pretty much it. And then the other thing to consider down here, near the end of the article, is what's most interesting for me, is the land use loss. The boiling solar siting debate in Virginia is fueled by the current rule of thumb that 1 megawatt of solar takes up about 7.5 acres of land. So we're talking a huge amount of land use. According to 2021 Virginia Commonwealth University report, solar has been built on 13,842 acres, with about 90% going on forested, crop, and pasture land. Those numbers come as Virginia has lost 500,000 acres of ag land. So there's only so much land, right? So if we're going to be building these huge solar farms everywhere, you're giving up ag land in a lot of states. Maybe not in the middle of the desert and Nevada and things like that, but Virginia, yeah, that's the trade-off. And that is no bueno. Those numbers come as Virginia lost 500,000 acres between 2017 and 2022 of ag land due to thin profit margins. The agriculture and forestry communities represent Virginia's top economic sectors, with a 2021 state report finding the former contributing 82.3 billion to the state's economy annually. There are decommissioning plans for solar projects requiring a site to be returned to its natural state after its 30-year life cycle, and agrivoltaics pairing solar with agricultural practices, but those aren't proven yet to the cultural community. That's new to me, agrivoltaics. So I guess how can you still use it for agricultural purposes while having a solar farm there? This is the larger concern that we are foregoing everyone's ability to produce agricultural goods forever in these places, said Williamson. I look back at the passing of President Carter, which I think has put a lot of the conversation in perspective. We should have been talking about this since 1972 when he put panels on the top of the White House. However, an updated report from VCU and Advances Energy Unit found that less than 1% of all those land types in the state have been taken up by utility scale solar. Going forward, if solar were to meet 50% of the state's energy demand, more than the current 6% solar currently provides, the updated VC reports estimates utility scale projects would need 3.1% of all cropland and about 1.5% of each forest land and cropland by 2035. And that's a not insignificant amount of cropland. So, interesting article. I think that this is going to be a continuing debate, 100%. Drop that down there for you. Okay, moving on. Dang, we're already 20 minutes in. I'm going to have to go faster. I'll kind of gloss over this one because it's only sort of land related. This is coming from the azbigmedia.com talking about real estate 15 hours ago. Um, here's how Arizona is driving the build to rent boom. As urban areas become more crowded and homeownership slips further out of reach, the build-to-rent market is stepping in to fill the gap. Nationwide, more than 110,000 single-family rentals are under construction, set to increase the BTR inventory by 53.5% once completed. Arizona stands out as a major player in the build-to-rent boom and expansion. Um, so then it just highlights areas where there's a lot of growth. Arizona's build to rent surge. Nearly 14,000 new houses for rent are in development, second only to Texas. So Texas has the most build to rent communities. They have entire. I live in Dallas. They have entire communities that are all build to rent. Blackstone came in and bought them, or it's just crazy. So Phoenix Metro, the driving force. The Phoenix Mesa Chandler Metro is at the center of the state's BDR boom, with 13,100 units underway, more than most U.S. states. Even with fewer units under development, Tucson and Flagstaff are contributing to Arizona's build to rent growth. The reason I'm highlighting this article is I just think it's important to recognize that there's a um, growing problem of real estate ownership. If we go back to the early article I went over where it's like boomers are not interested in transferring their real estate. They want to sell and actually keep that cash. Well, who are they selling to? Well, oftentimes they're selling to people who are already wealthy. So you're missing that generational wealth transfer. So if we're looking to see what a lot of people with wealth are doing, well, they're building forever assets, right? So they're building communities that are for rentals. Um, so for us, one of the reasons I think we're able to sell land is because so many people can't buy a house. They cannot afford one because these huge companies like BlackRock, they're the ones that are out there buying up entire communities, driving up prices. So just kind of a bigger trend here that I think is concerning and worth paying attention to. And we're in Texas, so we're very familiar with this. All right. Next, we're moving on to uh, Wyoming news now. I actually have two Wyoming articles today. Um, 50% reduction for all property tax discussion continues in the Senate. This is by Carrie Haderly. A bill that would have extended the life of a new long-term homeowner property tax exemption program has failed, but another that would offer 50% relief to homeowners regardless of age is still alive in the Senate. Senate file number 67, long-term homeowner tax exemption revisions, failed on a 15 to 13 vote on the Senate floor today. The program, which was approved last year, goes into effect with the 2025 tax year, gives long-term homeowners a 50% property tax cut if they are 65 or older and have paid property taxes in Wyoming for 25 years or more. The program has a sunset date, meaning it ends in 2027. Um, so this kind of sparks an interesting conversation for me. I mean, they're always kind of playing around with who they're going to charge taxes to and who not and why, and because of appreciation and things of that nature. So I think the idea here is, all right, we have some older folks in our community. Land values and home values have spiked, which means your tax values have gone up, your insurance has gone up, everything has gone up. So these people who bought their house for, maybe 25% of what it's worth now are just struggling to afford the home they're living in. Um, and for us, that's something to consider as an investor. If you're looking to go buy an asset that's become more expensive to the person that's holding on to it, it's just providing them a little more motivation to sell. And these plans, I think they're well intentioned, but they're always just going to kind of screw with the market. Um, and yes, this is very specific to some older folks. I would probably much prefer property taxes to just kind of disappear in a lot of areas. I'm not a big tax guy. Um, but at any rate, I thought this was fascinating and kind of goes further in. This is for single family homes, not necessarily the land sector, so I won't spend too much time on it. But uh, next, we have kind of a more interesting article. This is from the WYOfile.com. Senate panel wants all federal lands in Wyoming except Yellowstone. The Agricultural Committee asked Congress to give the state 30 million federal acres, including the Grand Teton National Park. This is by Angus M. Thurimer Jr. A Wyoming Senate panel is demanding that Congress give the state all federal lands and mineral rights in the Equality State except Yellowstone. The Agriculture, State and Public Lands and Water Resources Committee voted 4-1 for a resolution that demands Congress confirm by October 1st its intent to turn over the property. Senate Joint Resolution 2, the resolution demanding equal footing, covers some 30 million acres that derive from former federal territory. That amounts to about 47% of the state's land area. The resolution's lead sponsor, Senator Bob Ide, Republican from Casper, told the committee the property in question includes Grand Teton National Parks, pretty much everything, all BLM acreage. In addition to seeking property belonging to all Americans, the resolution demands federal mining mineral rights in Wyoming, which amounts to 69% of the rights in the state. Citing the Constitution, Ide said Congress shall have the power to dispose of the land. He interpreted what that means. It's a mandate to dispose, he said. They don't have the authority not to dispose. You can't do the opposite of something that's specifically directed in the U.S. Constitution, Ide said. He agreed with Scott Brown, who told the committee during public testimony that by virtue of your oath to uphold the Constitution, you are required to vote in favor of this resolution. And then this gets into some interesting constitutional law. Um, This is interesting. Okay, 100 years of lawsuits. I couldn't say whether mineral rights would belong to Wyoming or overlying landowners should the plan get its wishes. How do we figure out how do we figure out where that goes without creating 100 years worth of litigation? Crago asked him. I, who said he was formerly a mineral title landman, agreed the proposal could get very messy on the mineral estate. I've had a 40-acre parcel, he said, that had 200 different mineral owners on it, and you try to track them all down, and you can spend a month of work and still not find half of the mineral owners. Crago also warned that grazing costs could increase as the state comes to own federal lands. Outdoor Council Representative Underwood said grazing leases on state land cost $5.52 an animal month unit month versus $1.35 on federal property. Crago said Wyoming is restricted by its own constitution on how little it can charge for grazing, and we're probably at the bottom of that number right now. So it's just crazy. This article is worth the read if you want, if you're interested by federal and state legal processes and real property law. I think this is fascinating. But the idea of like hundreds of millions of acres transferring ownership, even if it's from the federal government to the state government, I think is really neat. So check this article out. That's from the wyofile.com. And again, the article is Senate panel wants all federal lands in Wyoming except Yellowstone. All right, and then our last article today, we're going to wrap up. All right, sorry, that was the last article today, so we're going to wrap up. Appreciate everybody who listened. I posted a couple of the interesting articles here. I've cited all of them. Um, Thank you for listening. Remember, if you need to buy or sell land, go to primelandexchange.com. If you need funding for your land deals, go to landpartnerfunding.com. And I have a 4-hour seminar coming up in 11 days here in Arlington, Texas, outside of DFW. All right. Well, I appreciate you. You have a beautiful day. We'll talk to you soon.